The relentless Atlanta sun beat down on Jamal's back as he hurried down Piedmont Road. He was already 10 minutes late for his shift at The Grind, the trendy coffee shop where he worked to save money for culinary school. He adjusted the strap of his messenger bag, mentally rehearsing his apology to Sarah, the store manager, who had zero tolerance for tardiness. Jamal, 24 years old, was the kind of person who attracted smiles. His genuine warmth radiated outward, and his easy laugh could fill a room. He dreamed of opening his own restaurant, a place where creativity and community could thrive. His aspirations seemed within reach with enough hustle and enough passion. As he approached the intersection of Piedmont and Lindbergh, he noticed a police car idling near the crosswalk. Two officers sat inside, their faces obscured by sunglasses. He didn't think much of it. Police presence was common in this area. He continued walking, head down, scrolling through text messages from his sister, Latoya, who was debating baby names for her first child. Suddenly, a voice boomed, "Hey! You there! Stop!" Jamal froze. He looked around, bewildered. Was it him they were calling? He was the only black man walking along the street, but then wondered whether they noticed him. The officers exited their vehicle, their movements crisp and deliberate. The taller one, Officer Crenshaw, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with disapproval, approached Jamal with a rigid posture. His partner, Officer Davies, younger and with a slightly hesitant air, shadowed him. "Sir, can I see some identification?" Crenshaw demanded, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Excuse me, officer? Am I being detained? What's this about?" Jamal asked, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. "Just show me your ID," Crenshaw repeated, his tone hardening. Jamal carefully set down his bag and reached for his wallet. He retrieved his driver's license and handed it to Crenshaw. As the officer examined the ID, his eyes narrowed. Suspicion etched into every line of his face. "Jamal Akeem Williams, born July 12th." He paused, his gaze lingering on Jamal. "You fit the description." "The description of what?" Jamal asked, his anxiety rising. "We received a report of a suspect involved in an armed robbery near Lenox Square. Black male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a messenger bag. You fit the bill." Jamal felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. "Officer, with all due respect, this is ridiculous. I was on my way to work. I'm late already. Ask anyone at The Grind. They'll vouch for me." Crenshaw ignored his plea. "Turn around, place your hands behind your back." "What? You're arresting me? On what basis? This is a mistake." Jamal protested, his voice laced with frustration and a growing sense of injustice. Davies stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. "Sir, comply with the officer's instructions." Despite his mounting fear, Jamal stood his ground. He knew his rights. "I haven't done anything wrong. You can't just arrest me based on a vague description." Crenshaw's patience snapped. He grabbed Jamal's arm, twisting it behind his back. "Resisting arrest," he declared, tightening his grip. Pain shot through Jamal's shoulder. He cried out, "I'm not resisting. You're hurting me." Passers-by began to stop and stare, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Jamal caught the eye of an older woman, her expression radiating empathy. He wanted to shout, to explain, but his voice caught in his throat. Within moments, Jamal was handcuffed and shoved into the back of the police car. The world outside blurred into a disorienting kaleidoscope of flashing lights and judging eyes. He could hear Latoya's voice in his head. "Stay calm, Jamal. Don't give them an excuse." But staying calm felt impossible. The ride to the precinct was a blur. Jamal sat in silence, his mind racing. How could this be happening? He had always been careful, always respectful of the law. He worked hard, paid his taxes, and treated everyone with kindness. He couldn't fathom how he had become a suspect, a criminal in the eyes of the law. At the precinct, he was processed, photographed, and fingerprinted. He was Mirandized and given the opportunity to make a phone call. He called Latoya, his voice trembling as he recounted the events. "They think I robbed someone," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "It's insane, Toya. I was just walking to work." Latoya's voice was firm, reassuring. "I'm on my way, Jamal. Don't say anything else until I get there. I'll call a lawyer." Hours crawled by. Jamal sat in a sterile, windowless holding cell, the silence broken only by the occasional clang of metal doors and the distant murmur of voices. He replayed the encounter with the police officers in his mind, searching for any sign, any clue that could explain what had happened. The longer he sat there, the more a chilling realization began to dawn on him. He wasn't being judged on his actions. He was being judged on the color of his skin. He understood his status. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Officer Davies couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. While Crenshaw seemed certain they had their man, Davies had his reservations. He reviewed the initial report of the robbery. The description was indeed similar to Jamal, but it was also incredibly generic. Black male, 6 feet tall, gray hoodie, messenger bag, could describe dozens of people in that area. Moreover, the witness, a frantic elderly woman who had been the victim of the robbery, had only offered a fleeting glimpse of the suspect. Her recollection was understandably blurred by fear and adrenaline. Davies glanced at the surveillance footage from a nearby gas station. A figure matching the suspect's description was seen running away from the direction of the robbery, but the image was grainy and indistinct. He tried to focus on the man's gait, his posture, any distinguishing features, but there was nothing conclusive. He had voiced these concerns to Crenshaw, but his superior had dismissed them out of hand. "We got our guy, Davies. End of story. Let's focus on closing the case." But Davies couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He looked at Jamal's booking photo. The man's eyes, despite the fear and weariness, held a glimmer of something that resonated with Davies: honesty. And he seemed that he would not hurt anyone on the street, and seemed kind in that mugshot that Davies found out so little of in the gas station security camera, where the black male seemed mean and wicked. He decided to do something he knew Crenshaw would disapprove of. He drove to the grind, hoping to speak with Jamal's co-workers. Sarah, the store manager, was visibly upset when Davies identified himself as a police officer and inquired about Jamal. "Jamal would never do anything like that," she insisted, her voice trembling with indignation. "He's one of the most reliable, kind-hearted people I know. He's always here on time, always willing to help out." Other employees echoed Sarah's sentiments. They described Jamal as hardworking, dedicated, and a pillar of the community. They were all shocked to learn of his arrest. One barista, a young woman named Chloe, spoke with particular passion. "Jamal is like a brother to me. He's been helping me study for my college exams. He's the last person in the world who would commit a crime." Davies listened intently, his doubts solidifying. He thanked them for their time and returned to the precinct, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He found Crenshaw in his office, reviewing paperwork. Davies took a deep breath and decided to speak his mind. "Sergeant, I have some concerns about the Jamal Williams case." Crenshaw looked up, his expression hardening. "Concerns? What concerns?" Davies explained his reservations about the witness identification, the lack of concrete evidence, and the positive testimonials he had received from Jamal's co-workers. Crenshaw listened, his face growing redder with each word. "Davies, are you questioning my judgment? We have a suspect who fits the description. We made an arrest. End of discussion. But Sergeant, what if we have the wrong guy? What if we're ruining an innocent man's life?" Crenshaw slammed his fist on the desk. "Innocent until proven guilty. That's how the system works. Now, unless you have something concrete to offer, I suggest you get back to work." Davies knew he was pushing his limits, but he couldn't back down. "I think we should at least look into Jamal Williams's alibi. Check his employment records, interview more witnesses." Crenshaw stared at Davies, his eyes burning with anger. "Davies, you're starting to annoy me. I'm warning you. Drop it." Davies knew he had reached a dead end. He turned and walked out of the office, his heart heavy with frustration and a sense of powerlessness. The day wore on, and Jamal remained in custody. LaToya arrived with a lawyer, a sharp, determined woman named Miss Evans. She met with Jamal, assuring him that she would fight for his release. Miss Evans immediately filed a motion for Jamal's release, arguing that there was insufficient evidence to hold him. She presented the court with Jamal's employment records, character testimonies from his co-workers, and the lack of any prior criminal record. She insisted that it did not align with the supposed descriptions for this arrest, and did not comply with law. Back at the precinct, the tension was palpable. Davies, consumed by his doubts, couldn't focus on his work. He kept replaying the events of the arrest in his mind, analyzing every detail, searching for any sign that he had missed. Suddenly, he received a call from dispatch. A local pawn shop owner had contacted the police, reporting that a man had attempted to pawn a stolen Rolex watch, the same watch that had been taken in the armed robbery. The pawn shop owner provided a detailed description of the man, and Davies immediately recognized the name. This one was a known associate of gangs near Piedmont and was the local bad egg of that street. He relayed the information to Crenshaw, who initially dismissed it as a coincidence. But Davies insisted, urging him to follow up on the lead. Finally, Crenshaw relented, assigning a different team to investigate the pawnshop tip. Within hours, the police apprehended the man who tried to pawn the watch. He confessed to the armed robbery, providing a detailed account of the crime, and implicated a different guy who also helped. He said a completely different suspect, nothing about what was initially claimed about Jamal. He gave all the real features to the robbery and proved that what he knew that did not exist with the person he was putting on file for doing the crime he did not commit. This proved there was major problem for Crenshaw when that confession occurred, and police knew things went too far. When Crenshaw received the news, his face drained of color. The reality of his mistake, the potential consequences of his actions, began to sink in. Jamal was released later that evening. Ms. Evans met him at the precinct, her face a mixture of relief and anger. "They're dropping the charges, Jamal, but this isn't over. We're going to hold them accountable for what they did to you." Jamal stepped out of the precinct, blinking in the glare of the streetlights. LaToya rushed to embrace him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Jamal," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." Jamal held her tightly, his own emotions swirling within him. He was relieved to be free, grateful for the support of his family and friends. But he was also deeply shaken, his faith in the justice system shattered. As he looked around, he noticed a figure standing in the shadows. It was Officer Davies. Davies approached Jamal hesitantly, his expression remorseful. "Mr. Williams," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't mean much, but I truly am sorry for what happened." Jamal looked at Davies, searching his eyes for sincerity. He saw a flicker of regret, a hint of empathy. "Why?" Jamal asked, his voice flat. "Why did you arrest me? Why did you believe I was guilty?" Davies hesitated. I had my doubts, but I didn't speak up strongly enough." "Because of my skin color?" Jamal pressed, his gaze unwavering. Davies flinched. That played a part. I'm not going to lie, but that doesn't excuse what happened. I should have done more." Jamal stared at Davies for a long moment, the weight of his experience heavy on his shoulders. "What happens now, officer? What happens to the next black man who fits the description?" Davies lowered his head. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I hope things will change." Jamal stood in silence for a moment, absorbing Davies's words. The apology felt insufficient, a mere band-aid on a gaping wound. He was free, but the experience had left an indelible mark on his soul. The ease with which he had been targeted, the blatant disregard for his rights, the fear that had gripped him, it was all still too fresh, too raw. "Change," he echoed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Easy to say, hard to do. I'm going to sleep it out and will continue my plan to achieve and prove to this world of injustices and discrimination to not stop striving." Davies winced. He knew Jamal's skepticism was justified. The systemic issues that had led to this situation were deeply ingrained, a complex web of implicit biases, institutional practices, and societal prejudices. He wanted to say something profound, something that would erase the pain he had contributed to, but the words felt hollow. "Mr. Williams, I understand your anger. All I can say is that I will do better. I will try to be a better officer." With his words done, he walked to his squad car and sped away, hoping it's done. But it had just began. The following days were a whirlwind. Ms. Evans, true to her word, launched a full investigation into Jamal's arrest. She filed a formal complaint against Officer Crenshaw for misconduct and racial profiling. She contacted the local media, ensuring that Jamal's story was heard. She even approached an organization about police that specializes in this area. She will not allow it. The story ignited a firestorm. News outlets ran headlines about the wrongful arrest, sparking public outrage. Civil rights activists organized protests, demanding justice for Jamal and calling for systemic reform within the Atlanta Police Department. People started taking videos from security footage of other occasions, similar to what has happened, and shared it on social media, which in turn caused the outrage as similar stories piled up. Crenshaw was so hated during that period that he lost hope and tried taking his own life in order to give some type of condolences. The pressure mounted on the police department to respond. An internal affairs investigation was launched, focusing on Crenshaw's actions and the department's policies regarding suspect identification and arrest procedures. The police chief, a seasoned officer with a reputation for integrity, publicly apologized to Jamal, expressing his commitment to ensuring that such an incident would never happen again. This police chief's name was Thomas Clark. The fallout for Crenshaw was swift and severe. He was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the internal affairs investigation. Publicly, the press made life hell for him, so no matter the verdict, his social standing and possibly his entire career were destroyed, as even neighboring departments had to stay away from the social turmoil caused by his actions. His credibility and his life crumbled before him because the verdict and consequences were so apparent. He was a very hated human at this point. This was due to Ms. Evans constantly trying to do everything in her power to ruin what was left of the remnants of Crenshaw and the justice system that wronged her client. She constantly and consistently stayed loud to get her message across and will not let down as much money was given in this movement to combat acts of injustice against humanity, including the police brutality from Crenshaw. Jamal, thrust into the spotlight, found himself struggling to cope with the attention. He was grateful for the support, but the constant interviews, the demands on his time, and the weight of public expectation were overwhelming. He felt like he was becoming a symbol, a poster child for racial injustice. But he was still just Jamal, a young man with dreams of cooking. All this newfound fame caused so much disturbance, he considered if his prior plans should even continue, if he could even feel a bit of normalcy. His entire reality had been warped into some sort of weird paradox of success through injustice. He spoke at rallies, sharing his story, urging people to fight for equality and justice. He used his newfound platform to advocate for police reform, community empowerment, and education about racial bias. Ms. Evans assisted with everything to keep his best interests, but Jamal still had his reservations with a new life. He used the fame, as it has changed him, to promote his ideas, so it has not ruined him completely, but also has never allowed him to sleep well. Meanwhile, Officer Davies found himself ostracized within the police department. His colleagues viewed him with suspicion, some accusing him of disloyalty. He was reassigned to desk duty, his career effectively stalled. Although he had spoke up with a shred of empathy for Jamal. Because of this, many of the people around him who sided and were aligned to a certain prejudice did not have the same image of him after having sympathy with the supposed wrongdoer. People close had ostracized him, and the higher-ups had demoted him because he also was found to have contributed a lack of following with rules in regards to procedures. Some tried to praise his morals, but at this current social climate, the good that had appeared in the justice system and the wrong committed seemed almost non-existent, as much more were required for Davies to redeem. So no matter how sorry Davies had been with how Jamal suffered during this difficult part of Jamal's life, and him trying to be sorry, the wrongs far outweigh any of the positives that Davies could get out, as any positives simply did not make any true difference. He had more damage with what he has said about an opposite view on the justice system's ruling, when the general climate around his social environment simply agreed with said choice to do him further problems on the workplace. No matter his thoughts, the results did not matter when everything just stayed wrong, as consequences followed due to what wrong that happened to Jamal. And all he did seemed minuscule at the end, because regardless the outcome, the system would still discriminate based on bias and preconceived notions. This would further enforce him that at the current system, no changes would happen, since people cared more for themselves in these political charged situations rather than change to occur for real justice. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had betrayed his own values. He had sworn to protect and serve, but he had allowed prejudice and fear to cloud his judgment. As his character deteriorated with the damage, he felt no point and sought solace elsewhere away from the station. With any change in personality, he tried fixing ending as a constant backfire to problems. This spiral for him only occurred even with people in his social circle encouraging him to not care too much, or that Davies did fine, because Davies thought this sort of thought created further segregation due to the current predicament. He confided in his wife Sarah. She listened patiently, offering unwavering support. "You did the right thing, Mark," she said, using his first name. "It might not feel like it now, but you stood up for what you believed in. That takes courage." Her supportive efforts gave the strength needed, as without such, he would lose any potential in succeeding, and she would lose who she had been close with and had originally fell in love with. It proved tough. Inspired by her words, Davies began to educate himself about racial bias and systemic injustice. He read books, attended workshops, and listened to the experiences of people of color. He came to realize the extent of his own unconscious biases, the subtle ways in which prejudice had shaped his perceptions and actions. Despite this and any learning moment, the end remained that he wronged someone to a heavy extreme for preconceived notions and made him at this time more conscious about all potential scenarios. Due to this, he also reached out to Ms. Evans, offering his cooperation in the investigation of Crenshaw and other department practices. She was initially wary, but Davies's sincerity and willingness to take responsibility for his actions gradually won her over. She could acknowledge how tough his life had been and thought, in contrast to all sides in this justice crime, that Davies was perhaps on the right track due to the heavy support and dedication of a loved one. Ms. Evans advised and kept Davies, due to Davies knowing of potential hidden issues due to racial bias procedures on cases with victims discriminated, that has helped turn his life and mindset a brand new. He may have at least redeemed somewhat and became even more paranoid in everything he has come to witness, but could use his life experiences for future help. As the internal affairs investigation concluded, Crenshaw was ultimately fired from the police department. The department implemented new training programs focused on racial bias, de-escalation techniques, and community policing. Some people gave small bits of sympathy and said he should take another course that taught something with values like that. Jamal, exhausted by the constant attention, eventually retreated from the spotlight. But he didn't abandon his commitment to justice. He enrolled in culinary school, pursuing his dream of opening his own restaurant. But the business had plans for opening a service with providing free meals in any city due to discrimination against people. This was Miss Evans' main ideas for justice, if money were not a concern, so they thought of combining with his initial goals for business for what may redeem an innocent life with his story and help any discriminatee feel at least equal as human beings as they have gone to make a large community of helping services. The trauma from the initial issues and troubles in life never allowed Jamal to rest easy, despite the business helping others. It has still proven for the positives, even for those to heal together, and it makes both him and others satisfied by their helpful efforts. This ending of trying his efforts to combine old plans into something different helps create a future of redemption, as Jamal wanted his life for those like him wronged, and he succeeded that for life.